Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here with the audience of the East-West Center, and thank you to Dr. Brown for inviting me today. I'm going to share my slides here. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, so my book is Chop Fry Watch Learn Pei-Mei in the Making of Modern Chinese Food, and I'm hoping that many of you listening today actually know who she is. But for those of you who don't, I'm going to be talking about who she is and why she's significant. For those in the audience that might read Chinese, the book was published. Sorry? The book was published last year in Chinese in Taiwan. So you can order it in, any place either in Taiwan or here in the US, if you're interested. So this book fits into my larger research agenda, which has, as you can see, a lot to do with food. I've published some other edited volumes with by myself and with other colleagues, and I am really interested in food, not just as a way of celebrating Chinese culture and Chinese identity, but as a way of really thinking critically about a lot of the important ideas about food and the way foodways kind of seeps into so many different aspects of life in China and in Asia, generally speaking. So one of the motivations I talk about and why I wanted to write this book about Fu Pei-Mei was my examination of the existing literature on Chinese foodways in English. And when I put these covers up, it's just really easy for everyone to see. There's a kind of a theme here, right? I always ask my students, what do you see? And if all of you could, raise your hands, then be asking you, what is it you see about all of these different book covers? And red is very predominant theme. You see the words chop suey many, many times, and you see kind of the emblematic aspects of Chinese takeout food as we know it in the United States. So you see chopsticks and you see a soy sauce packet and a takeout box. And one of the things that's really common to all of these books, if you think about it and you look very closely, is they all talk about eating Chinese food in a restaurant, right? So a lot of it is it's about how non-Chinese audiences respond to Chinese food, right? But as I was growing up as a second generation Chinese American in Michigan, we never ate in a restaurant. My parents always said, "Oh, we can cook better at home." So we never got to eat Chinese food unless we went to a big city like Toronto where we would have dim sum or, go out to eat for special things. Like back home, it was always home cooking. And so one of the things I really wanted to bring to the study of Chinese food was an analysis of home cooking and what Chinese food is like as is experienced from the inside in a Chinese family, not from the outside, by non-Chinese audiences. And I really wanted to bring that perspective because to me, Chinese food has never just been about food. It's always been about family and community and gathering. And that's just the way that I grew up. And I'm sure many of you will have shared this same experience, right? It's never just about the food you eat or the recipes or something tasty. It's always about gathering with other people. Um, so that's part of what I wanted to bring to thinking about Chinese food and the study of Chinese food history in a historical way. So, so there's an external reason why I wrote the book, but there's also just an internal reason, and this is it. Um, Basically, I grew up in Midland, Michigan. My parents, who you can see pictured here, moved to the United States in the 1960s. They didn't know each other. They met on the campus of the University of Minnesota. Um, and they moved to a small town called Midland, Michigan, where I was born and my brother and sister were born. And we grew up there in the 70s and 80s. And here's a family picture of all of us. I'm the baby in the high chair, And there we are eating our very typical Chinese American meal. It's a hamburger with peas and baked potato and a jello ring. So very, very dated. It's probably from the 1970s. I think it was my sister's birthday, so that was her choice of a meal. And my dad is the one behind the camera, so he's not pictured, but I think of this as a family photograph. And I wanted to show what is this like around the family dinner table, right? It's not just Chinese food, it's also lots of other things, but I really wanted to share that experience. And when I was growing up in Michigan in the 1970s and 80s, one of the things that my mom had on her cookbook shelf were these iconic cookbooks by Pei-Mei. It's called Pei-Mei's Chinese Cookbook, and can see it's a very iconic cover with red is the first volume, and blue is the second volume, and green is the third volume. And I, saw my mom, she would look at these cookbooks before we would have like a lot of people over for dinner. Um, she might copy some of the recipes or take notes on them. So I was very familiar with these cookbooks when I was growing up. Um, and you can see they have very nice pictures. They're very kind of, remember they were published in the late 60s and 70s, so very Technicolor, but very bright, vibrant photos of all the dishes. So when I was a kid, I would just look through the pictures of the dishes, because it's just kind of something fun to look at. And also, I would look at these recipes. And one of the very fascinating things about Fu Pei Mei's cookbook is that it's bilingual. So the entire thing has recipes in Chinese on the left and English on the right. And when I was a kid, I didn't speak I mean, I spoke Chinese, but I didn't read Chinese very well beyond maybe a few hundred characters. So I couldn't read the Chinese instructions, and I would just look at I would just look at the English recipes. Um, and sometimes there were just a lot of weird names of dishes I didn't understand in English, and like something I write about in my book called mold sans soup. And I always wondered, does it have mold in it? What is that exactly? All kinds of strangely translated dish names that I would just puzzle over when I was a kid. So the only thing I knew about Fu Pei-mei when I was growing up was that she was a cookbook author. And she appears on the back cover of these cookbooks, and that's all I thought about her for a very long time. Um, when I went abroad to Germany as a junior in college, and I felt like cooking some Chinese food. That was the first time I was really away from a college cafeteria. I was living on my own, and I had to cook for myself sometimes. Um, so my mom on the long distance phone call suggested, "Hey, why don't you look at Fu Pei-mei's cookbooks? I'll send you some recipes. Those are a good way to begin to learn how to cook Chinese food." So for my mom, this was, just a real touchstone of a book. So it wasn't until I was a mother myself, I have two kids, and I wanted to make Chinese food for them, that I went back to Fu Pei-mei's cookbook, which now sit on my shelf, cookbook shelf, to look for easy Chinese recipes that I can make so that my kids grow up eating Chinese food, because it's really important to me that they like eating Chinese food, that they not say, "Oh, I won't eat that, that's gross," or whatever. I want them to have that connection to Chinese food because it's such an important part of my Chinese identity, and as I'm sure it is for so many Chinese Americans. Um, so this time when I went back to look at Fu Pei-mei's cookbook many, many decades later, in search of recipes to cook for my own kids, what I noticed was it did not only have the recipes, bilingual recipes that I remembered, and it did not only have color photographs of dishes, it also had all kinds of black and white photos of Fu Pei-mei traveling around the world, meeting a lot of famous people. Here she is meeting Jiang Jingguo. And it had this very tantalizing photo of all these newspaper clippings in different languages about her going around the world. And by that point, I had been trained as a historian, a gender historian, and I knew that, oh, if she's in the newspapers, then there's probably some kind of paper trail, and maybe she might be an interesting person to kind of do some historical research about. And so one thing led to another, And that led me to writing my book. Because what I discovered was that not only was Fu Pei-Mei the author of these three iconic cookbooks that my mom had on her cookbook shelf, she was also on TV in Taiwan for 40 years, right? It's probably got to be one of the longest lasting, television appearances in modern history for a food person. She started in 1962. You can see that set. It's a very, very simple set. It's no running water, and you can see the thing that she's cooking on. That, if you don't know what that is, it's not a plug-in, kind of a cook pot or something like that. That is a charcoal brazier. So you manage the heat by sticking charcoal in there and lighting it. And that's how she was cooking on live television, which is amazing to me, totally amazing. And, all of the stuff she had on hand there, she had to bring herself, all the bowls, all the dishes, all the ingredients, everything. And on that first day, what she was demonstrating for people was squirreled fish, which I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in a second. It's called squirreled fish. Well, let me see if I have it in the next one. Oh, actually, it's back here. Let me see if I can find it here. This is squirreled fish, right? This is the dish that she made. So you cut the fish such that when you deep fry it, it puffs up into the shape of a squirrel's tail, and then you put a sauce on top. So this is a very popular kind of Eastern Jiangsu dish. And that's what she demonstrated, right, on this very bare bones set on her debut in television in 1962. But she had a very long career. She wanted to retire at many points, and the Taiwan television wouldn't let her because she was so popular. So they, kind of made her keep going till she was on the air for 40 years. The person that she most resembles to most American audiences is Julia Child. You can see that they died in the same year. They had overlapping careers, but I always like to say that Fu Pei-Mei debuted on television before Julia Child did. Um, but you can see they're very, kind of closely related in terms of having iconic cookbooks, in terms of having these long-lasting television careers, and really being a household name. So, whereas, in the New York Times, they called Fu Pei-Mei the Julia Child of Chinese cooking. I argue that for people in Taiwan, you would call Julia Child the Fu Pei-Mei of French food, right? Because that's whom everyone would be measured against. So I found all kinds of quotes saying that, so and so is the Fu Pei-Mei of England, or so and so is the Fu Pei-Mei of Finland. Everyone is measured against Fu Pei-Mei as far as in that time period as being who is a noteworthy culinary personality. So you can see here, I like to have this as a comparison of the very basic set that Taiwan television had in the 1960s. It started in 1962, and the very elaborate test kitchen, actually operational kitchen that WGBH had for Julia Child's cooking program. And you can see all of these assistants and everybody helping her in the back there. And it's a pretty bare bones operation. But I like to say that when Julia Child, first appeared on television, the dish she made was an omelet compared to the dish that Fu Pei-Mei made in her very basic wok. Just all she had was a wok and a charcoal brazier. She made that elaborately cut fish dish, which is just to me just one of the kind of measures of the complexity of ordinary Chinese cooking that, ordinary housewives would have been interested in cooking in Taiwan in the 60s. So one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, well, why does Fu Pei-Mei come along at the time that she does come along, right? For Julia Child, she was introducing French food to American audiences. This is a time of the Kennedys and Camelot and Jacqueline Kennedy's kind of French flair, right? So there's a reason why middle-class American households would want to learn how to cook fancy French foods, to show they have the sophistication, to show they know how to make these different kinds of foods. But why would, housewives in Taiwan need someone like Fu Pei-Mei to teach them how to cook? Don't they already know how to cook? Well, the answer is because Fu Pei-Mei comes along in a post-war moment. Remember, television debuts in 1962. Taiwan is still recovering from World War II. Basically, the Nationalist Party, which retreats to Taiwan, loses the civil war with the communists on the mainland, and in so doing, along with the Nationalist Party, come all kinds of people from all over China to land in Taiwan after 1949 when the nationalists lose and the communists win. So all those people from all over China bring with them their regional foodways. So suddenly on this very small island, you have all kinds of people from all over different parts of China who now are cooking all kinds of tasty looking things. Your neighbor from Sichuan maybe makes one kind of dish. You're from Jiangsu, you make something else. You know, another person might be from Fujian or whatever. They're all making their own regional dishes and it's very, a lot of housewives want to impress their neighbors, family, and friends. So they want to learn how to make these Chinese regional dishes as well. And so that was Fu Pei-Mei's first claim to fame was that when she was a housewife, she didn't know how to cook Chinese food, or she was a terrible cook to begin with, and her husband would always complain and criticize her. And so she took her dowry, she took her jewelry and stuff, and used it to pay to pay restaurant chefs in Taiwan from Hunan, from Beijing, from Sichuan to teach her all their specialty dishes. So she had, a kind of a wide-ranging view of different Chinese regional cuisine. So that was one of her major appeals for housewives in Taiwan at the time, right? And so that's one of the things she was really well known for. And her first cookbook is divided into four different cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, and kind of telling Americans about different regional Chinese cuisines in a very basic way, right? Of course, there's many, many more than four, but for Americans in the 1960s, that was huge news. You know, the New York Times food critic was said about her that, here she is introducing this real Chinese regional cooking. We aren't familiar with that. You know, people that just know about chop suey are in for a real treat because this is something totally different people haven't seen before. So that was one of her initial claims to fame. So what I did was, in discovering that she had this long career on television, that she had written these bilingual cookbooks, I realized that the figure of Fu Pei-Mei could tell many, many stories about modern Taiwan, and that's what I do in my book. I basically use her as a central, interesting figure, and I talk about all kinds of other aspects of life in not just in Taiwan, but also in the United States. So I talk about her as a media figure on television. I talk about her role in terms of domesticity and the family and gender roles and how they were changing at the time. Because at the start of her career, all these housewives in Taiwan want to learn how to cook these dishes. By the end of her career, when she retires, so many women have gone into, the work world, and there's so many other options for eating in Taiwan that she has to shutter her cooking school. So it's a real story about changing gender roles as well. I talk about foreign relations because at this same time is the time when the United States moves its recognition away from the Republic of China on Taiwan to diplomatically recognizing the People's Republic of China, mainland China. So there's a huge sea change for Taiwan in those ways as well. I talk about language and translation because the cookbook is bilingual. I talk about new kitchen technologies like the electric rice cooker, which kind of revolutionized rice cooking for, housewives and households everywhere. I talk about changing ideas of what it means to be Chinese or Taiwanese and how those things are contested and different. And I also talk about the migration story because to me, there's no better iconic symbol of that transpacific migration for my parents' generation than Fu Pei-Mei's cookbook because everybody at the time brought a copy of her cookbook with them when they came to the United States from Taiwan at the time. Ask anyone, in that generation, they all know who she is. Not so much young people today, but older people do know. So one of the things that I play with in talking about in my book is talking about translation. I really go in depth into an analysis of her Chinese English cookbook. And I like to show this picture because this is the way most people think about translation. This is a picture from her cookbook of all the, important vegetables that you might need or want. And you see on the top, the vegetable is listed in Chinese, and on the bottom, it's in English. So you think to yourself, oh, everything is translated in this book. It's in Chinese, it's in English, it's kind of a one-to-one correspondence. But what I realized in reading, after being, I learned Chinese, in college and after college and graduate school so that I could do historical research. And in doing so, I came to read both the Chinese and the English versions. And what's so interesting is that I realized it's not a direct translation. In fact, it's very approximated. The English is pretty choppy. There's a lot of reasons for that because Fu Pei-Mei said that she wasn't very good with English herself. So she actually asked an American student of hers to help her translate the book. That American student knew no Chinese. So it was kind of a mishmash affair for that first cookbook. For her second and third cookbooks, they were much kind of more accurately translated because she had the help of American women who did know Chinese. One of them was a graduate student who was studying in Taipei at the time and was able to more accurately translate what she had written. Um, and I like to show this distinction, even in the title of the cookbook itself. In English, it's called Pei-Mei's Chinese Cookbook. But the Chinese title of the book is Pei-Mei Shipu, which is just Pei-Mei Cookbook. Because in Chinese, you don't need to explain that it's Chinese food, because every cookbook in the cookbook store, most of them will be Chinese food. It's only Western food or non-Chinese food that you would need to explain what it is that you're making. Just like in the United States, if you don't specify, people will just assume it's American or whatever. And it's only a Chinese cookbook that needs to say what, or not just a Chinese, but any non-Western cookbook has to specify, what kind of cuisine they're making. So I think there's a lot of examples of this where the Chinese and English don't exactly match up. And that tells us very interesting things about how she was trying to speak to two audiences at the very same time, right? Both a Chinese speaking audience, so her audience of housewives in Taiwan, for whom these cookbooks were like class materials for her cooking school. A lot of it was based on the kinds of dishes that she would teach in her cooking school. Um, but she also had all these American audiences, and you wonder to yourself, well, what are all these Americans doing in Taiwan at the time? Again, that's because the United States had diplomatic relations with Taiwan at the time, and we sent over American military advisors to Taiwan to help the Taiwan's military as to serve as advisors. So all of those American military men, many of them brought over their wives. And what did those wives want to do? They wanted to learn to cook Chinese food. So I also found a lot of examples of American military wives who would take a class with Fu Pei-Mei, go back to America, and then teach all their American neighbors how to cook Chinese food, on the basis of their experience cooking with Fu Pei-Mei. So the circle of her influence is indeed very, very wide at this time. I play with this idea of the translation, and I play with this idea about, Chinese cooking in the very title of my book itself, because you may have heard of the Chinese four-character phrase, eat, drink, man, woman. It's the name of a wonderful food film by Ang Lee. If you haven't seen it, I can highly recommend it. It's about this family in Taiwan with four daughters, and there's all this great food. The father's a chef, and all kinds of funny relationships and things like that. But in any case, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman is actually from a classic Confucian text, and it's talking about the basic desires of humans, that is, eating and drinking, food and drink, and sex. Um, and I wanted to play on that idea of a four-character phrase because in Chinese, sayings are often in four characters. And so I made up my own four-character phrase to come up with the title of my book, Chop, Fry, Watch, Learn. Chopping and frying are the two main pillars of, well, maybe not frying as such, but chopping and the control of heat over time, more accurately, Dao Gong and Huo Hou. Those are the two main pillars of Chinese cooking. So, the reason that Chinese people say they use chopsticks is because all the work is done in the kitchen, right? You don't need to bring out your knife and do the manual labor of sawing your meat to pieces at the table, right? That should be done in the kitchen. All you need to do is bring your chopsticks or use chopsticks to eat elegantly, and you just enjoy the meal. So chopping, and I use the word fry, but really there's much more to Chinese cooking than stir frying. But the control of heat over time is the critical aspect of Chinese cooking. And as one Chinese food writer I quote likes to say, Western cooking, they have a lot of slow cooking methods, but they do not have nearly the number of kinds of cooking methods for quick cooking over heat. And that's where, you need to control the heat for a particular dish. And they have many, many dozens of words, cooking words for techniques that we don't really have in English. And it's just, we have to use very cumbersome translations for to translate specific cooking techniques. Watching and learning is the other pair because people were watching her on television and learning how to cook. So I thought Chop Fry Watch Learn kind of creates the feeling of a four-character phrase. It creates the feeling of something old and traditional, but in fact, it's totally modern and I made it up myself. And that's what the way I feel about thinking about Chinese cuisine, right? People are always thinking about it as this ancient, long tradition of 5,000 years. But in fact, people like Fu Pei-Mei really modernized it and made it something for the 20th century on television. With all these women who were working women and didn't have a way to learn how to cook from older generations themselves because maybe they had been separated after World War II. So I wanted to kind of playfully hint at that in the title itself of my book. So, this is, you know, as I mentioned before, people of a certain age know who Fu Pei-mei is in Taiwan. Certainly anyone my age or older. In their 40s or 50s or older. But younger audiences don't necessarily know who she is. So I was just on a book tour in Taiwan this past summer, and some young people said, "Gosh, we're so pleased to know who this woman is. We didn't know who she was." And I just think that's just a really interesting aspect of Taiwan's history that I'm hoping people in Taiwan can get to know. And one fun thing I found was this cooking contest on Instagram. It was run by this Asian American farmer who has a mother who is Taiwanese and a father who was Hungarian. And he actually wanted to start an import-export business for Chinese dry goods. And to go with his dry goods, he bought 1,000 copies of Fu Pei-mei's cookbook. The dry goods business never got off the ground, but there he had 1,000 copies of her cookbook. And wherever Leslie is the name of the farmer who ran this heritage farm, wherever she would go, she inherited those cookbooks and she would bring them with her, like 50 boxes of these pristine condition cookbooks with her back and forth everywhere she moved when she moved across the country. And finally, after she started her own Asian heritage vegetable farm in California, she decided to have a Pei-Mei cook-off, and these were some of the dishes that, some of her followers made using recipes from Fu Pei-Mei. So this is a, updated for the 21st century edition of Fu Pei-Mei's Chinese cookbook. And later on, I was like, wow, all these dishes look so good. They don't look anything like the kind of the messy home cooking I do. And I later found out most of the people that were cooking for this are actually, food professionals themselves, like chefs or cookbook authors or whatever. So no wonder their food looks beautiful as well. But that's been a really fun part of doing this food book is that there's just so many food-centric foodies online. And it's been just a really fun way to get to connect with different people through this new medium. Um, I this is I'm gonna stop there. This is a video of her cooking. Um or maybe Shauna, you can tell me, do we have time to watch a few minutes of this? So she's butterflying the fish. You see that the skin is still on it, but she's going to cut it so that when it's done, she can then, bread it and fry it. That's what she was showing you first. I love that, she does it in like with a huge cleaver and she does it in like 3 seconds. And suddenly it's this beautifully cut flour, a fillet. So now she can bread it and fry it and it puffs up like a squirrel's tail. But anyway, it's just she was just such a pro with the cleaver. So, anyway, I will stop my talk there. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing all of your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really a fascinating talk, and what a wonderful way for us all to begin thinking about our meals and other plans for the Spring Festival. So thank you. That's really delightful. Just a reminder to the audience that we welcome your questions for Dr. King as well. So please share them in, I think we have a Q&A function that you can add your questions. But just to get us started, Michelle, if I can just kind of start from that wonderful video of her preparing that fish dish, which I think, I had been searching for that connection, but you mentioned it with the An Lee movie, right? Inshir Nanu. And I'm pretty sure that in that opening scene, doesn't he do something like that with a fish dish as well?
I
But
don't remember what
yeah.
his initial dish is. I remember he makes a chicken, which is like packed, I think it's packed in salt,
Mm,
and then you have to
yeah.
break it with a hammer and stuff like that. I don't remember if he probably makes a fish dish somewhere in there, but yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking that probably An Lee, who would have been a child in Taiwan when the show was popular, I'm thinking that's I can imagine part of his own kind of, so really obviously a very influential kind of cultural touchstone. So yeah, so just to kind of get us started with some questions, the TV component was really something that I was surprised by. I think just because coming out of the wartime period, and then here she is. And could you speak a little bit more about what you might have learned about kind of TV and that whole,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what's really interesting is that very, very sadly, the early, programming from the 60s and through the 70s was never taped. It was all live. So there was no record of her early, just like we have the first showings of Julia Child, we still have that recording. We don't have any recordings of her early on, very, very sadly. So when I went to Taiwan in 2014, I guess, when I started writing this book, there you couldn't find any, there weren't any, not too many videos of her online, with the exception of some videos that had been put up by a Filipino fan. They were all dubbed into Tagalog because her program was sold to the Philippines, dubbed into Tagalog, and she's known and beloved by many people in the Philippines as well, who would come home from school and turn on and watch this, lady do her Chinese cooking. So at the time, I just sat in the Taiwan television studios to watch as many episodes as I could. You know, Actually, very interestingly, since that time, there has been a Netflix program about her life, in part. It's called What She Put on the Table. I think you can still find it on Netflix. It's kind of a melodrama, but it uses her life as part of it, but then other parts are fictionalized. Um, but after that point, in an attempt to market it, then Taiwan Television put up like more than 700 episodes of her cooking program. And so you can find them if you go on YouTube and look. I mean, you might have to search a little bit and you might have to use Chinese because they're not dubbed. They're just, straight Chinese. But you can find all kinds of, if you do know Chinese, you can find all kinds of dishes and just see her making them, usually in 5 to 20 minutes. But one of the really interesting things I found out about the early period was that, she wasn't the only one. There were a lot of other women who were also on television who also were hosts, but after a few years, she became that singular figure. And I think part of the reason for her success was that she was not just good at cooking, because all the grandmas could cook, like they could all cook well. But what she was good at was speaking. And you'll notice in the clip that I showed you, right? Every time she's talking and cutting, I mean, every time she's just like doing something, she's also telling you stuff. What kind of fish to make? Where to get this? What is this? When do you people eat this? Where is this from? Always commenting and talking. And I noticed that very distinctly because sometimes on her program, she would have a guest chef. And I would watch those programs and they would like not say a word. Their hands would move really quickly, but they themselves never said anything. And so you realize, oh, it actually takes a lot of skill to be good on television. You can't just know how to cook. You have to know how to have interesting patter, tell people what the secrets are, speak in an interesting manner. So that's what really endeared her, I think, to generations of housewives on television.
Great, thank you. We have a question from an audience member about her influence on, TV cooks after her, right? And the mentioning of Yen Can Cook, which I remember watching when I was a kid in the 80s. Do you find that she also had that influence on kind of other chefs on TV as well?
Well, I think that I don't know because unless you're from Taiwan, like I grew up, I had no idea she was on television. I just thought she was a cookbook author. So for a lot of second generation audiences in the United States or Canada or whatever, they don't watch her program because they never saw it on TV. So I'm not sure. And if Martin Yan grew up in Hong Kong, I'm not sure if the program was on in Hong Kong. She visited Hong Kong and stuff like that. But, she's really known in Taiwan. So I'm not sure to what extent she had that influence. But as I like to say, Joyce Chen also had a cooking program in the United States, a Chinese cooking program, but it only lasted for a few episodes. It didn't last very long. And I think that's because American audiences were simply not ready to embrace a Chinese cook. Martin Yan really was the first one to have a long-term kind of staying power beyond just a few, like one season. So I think she really is I mean, I'm not sure if they consciously knew who she was, but certainly she precedes all of these other television cooking people, or Chinese cooks.
Yeah. So another comment, actually from the China seminar folks about how going to Taiwan, I think for many people is a really wonderful introduction to Chinese cuisine, partly because there are people from all over continental China and I wonder also her experiences as part of that wave of post-war, Taiwanese, refugees, right? Kind of, people moving to Taiwan that she would have had access to, other cooks, chefs, culinary traditions. So I don't know if that struck you, that she had that really unique experience just born out of that kind of post-war.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah.
really, it's interesting because at the same time, when everybody first went to Taiwan, like in the 1950s, everybody's poor. Everybody's cooking at home because they don't have, there's no this going out all the time and eating out all the time. And it's really with the rise of Taiwan's economy and the creating of this, this vibrant eating outside and restaurant scene that everybody knows and loves today. Um, I have a friend who's a cookbook friend, Carolyn Phillips. She's written a marvelous cookbook about Chinese regional cuisines, from mainland China. And she worked for a long time in Taiwan. And she says that, lived through the heyday of regional Chinese cuisines because it's right at that moment, Shauna, because it's all those people who have come over directly from mainland China. But then when they have kids, their kids don't have a really strong sense of identity with that regional cuisines because to them that's grandparents' food or they're growing up eating all kinds of different foods. And so it's not quite the same. Right now in Taiwan, it's a lot more international cuisines are available. Every kind of food in the world is available, but the really strong regional cuisines already it's a few generations removed. So, the foodscapes always change. It never stays the same. So that's a really just an interesting part of that particular post-war generation for sure.
So yeah, we have a question from Kristen in the audience about kind of similar to that, about how like because of historical moments when you might have people move, right? And so if there's like a generational shift in those movements, but then also cuisines get the word that Kristen uses kind of frozen at different times, right? Kind of like our understanding of what a cuisine is might be based on a historical kind of moment. I wonder if you see that happening as well. Like, do you look back at these dishes and you're like, yes, those are really great dishes, but then that's also kind of like a 60s or 70s moment, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting because so when I went back in 2014, it was the 10th anniversary of her death. And I had met her family, I interviewed her adult children, and they invited me to go to like this commemorative thing around the 10th anniversary of her death in October. And and at the same time they involved these restaurants in cooking the classics of Fu Pei-Mei. And so what's really interesting is the feeling of nostalgia that those dishes evoke, that her daughter said, "Oh, these dishes remind us of the dishes of our parents' era," right? That already that the styles change, the tastes change. There's another woman I interviewed that kind of did this blog, a short-lived blog called Pei-Mei a Day, where she was like modernizing Pei-Mei's dishes. And so a lot of it is like, don't use so much oil, don't use MSG, the kinds of things that people are concerned with now, right? So always dishes are changing, and always there's going to be some sense of time that's also embedded. So that's why I always think it's really funny when people talk about authenticity because, as a historian, it's like authentic to when and what and whom, these things are never going to be exactly, the way Confucius ate you wouldn't, Confucius would not recognize the way people in China eat today, right? Totally different. Totally, totally different over thousands of years, all these changes happening. Um, so that's something that I just think is interesting, that sense of, obviously for a lot of people, that sense of nostalgia that food holds for us.
Mhm. Okay, so a question about the process of adapting Chinese cooking to Western kitchens, and then also just about her own experiences overseas, in this process.
Mhm. Yeah, so one of the things that I write about in one of the chapters is, my own family's experience growing up in Michigan, because there was also another auntie. We called her auntie. She wasn't my aunt, but just like a family friend who taught Chinese cooking, made her own cookbook, and knew who Fu Pei Mei was. And, all of us knew that, in Midland, Michigan, you're not gonna get, this is in the 70s and 80s, you're not gonna get tofu or anything, Like, you have to make your own. So a lot of or soy milk. My dad would always make soy milk. Not always, but like occasionally he would have the means to make soy milk. And like the auntie, she would go to the grain elevator in Midland, Michigan, where they sell soybeans for animal feed, and she would buy some so she could make soy milk. And then the man selling the feed is like amazed that humans eat this, like unbelievable to him that humans would eat soy. But so, obviously so much has changed, right? When I went back to visit my hometown, like now there's Korean restaurants and Indian restaurants and all kinds of other foods, but when I was growing up, like we literally had to go to Toronto, 6-hour drive to go load up on Chinese, dry goods and canned goods and whatever else we could bring back into the United States. I would sit on top of the box of mangoes, so that we could have fresh mangoes, and that would happen like once a year or something like that. Or occasionally we go to Detroit to go buy groceries. But now these ingredients and with the internet are just so much more pervasive, and it's so much easier to get your hands on really great ingredients. So, and now with the internet, it's just so easy to watch anybody. There's so many great, like people cooking Chinese food on television or on the internet now. So it's never been easier to cook Chinese food, but at the same time, in some ways, never been harder because people are just so busy. And I know that as a working mom, like it's hard. Home cooking is been in decline for some time, but I think no matter whether people do or don't cook for themselves, like I think it's a rare person that doesn't appreciate it when somebody cooks for them. you know.
Yeah, so just speaking about your personal experience, Michelle, there are a couple of comments. Everybody loved the photo that you shared of your family that, and I agree, that's just a really beautiful photo. And also kind of maybe some mixed memories about similar Jello dishes that many of us might have experienced as children. Was that like, I don't know if you remember because you were clearly an infant, but what's your guess? Would that have been sweet or maybe even like a savory, like maybe a tomato
Oh, it
aspect
looked
that
like
was a
there was
common?
stuff in it, like fruits or
Mm,
something like that. I don't know, but
yeah,
that
yeah,
was that was 1972, so just very or 73, I guess. So
right.
very, very, very much of the moment.
Yeah, for sure.
And
So yeah.
my mom always loved to experiment. Like
Mm.
she would make meatloaf, she would make, she would try dishes and want to try them and she would make them for us. So, she did, but most of the cooking she did at home was Chinese food. And or my dad would sometimes make spaghetti. Like that was always his thing. He would make the spaghetti with
Mhm.
ragu sauce or something. But yeah, there's just a lot of good memories. And that's what I wanted to bring to to Chinese food is a sense of all the stuff that surrounds it, not just about the food, but all the inputs, historical and personal and everything else and political that all go into thinking about food waste. It's just a really rich topic, I think, for many,
Yeah.
many people. Yeah.
So two other questions came in. Kind of around that kind of contextual questions. So one is about, so she's a public figure in Taiwan. Of course, she's spanning an era of amazing political, social, cultural transformation, right? Taking us all the way from, kind of the strictest point in the political system, and then that image of her with Jiang Jingguo, and then we know how much things change after liberalization in the 1980s. So yeah, so just curious about her role as a public figure during those eras. And then second question, just to make sure that we don't miss it, there was also a question about um, Taiwanese food in the US specifically, and whether or not you feel like her role is still a touchstone um, for like Taiwanese food or what, we can think of as Taiwanese food, but also in the US.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is really important to point out to listeners who may or may not know is kind of the t distinction or not. I mean, really a distinction I think we have to be articulate about Chinese and Taiwanese identities because for a lot of people in Taiwan today, they adamantly don't call themselves Chinese. They feel that that means mainland China. They say we are Taiwanese, we're not Chinese. And of course, I didn't grow up that way, even though because my parents were born in China and then moved to Taiwan and then came to the United States in the 60s. So all my life, my parents thought of themselves as Chinese. They still do. And so I call myself Chinese American as a result. But for a lot of people whose families have been in Taiwan for many generations, whose families didn't come over with the mainlanders, they speak Taiwanese as a dialect, and they have a very strong identity as Taiwanese. So it's really important to point that out because that has changed over the time that Fu Pei-Mei was alive. And she's associated with the Nationalist Party and kind of the ruling party. She was a mainlander. She's not Taiwanese. So there's a whole aspect of the foodways that she never really covered very much, right? She wasn't an expert in Taiwanese food. She was an expert in mainlander regional cuisines. And over time, she tried to, I think in the 80s, she put forth a cookbook about Taiwanese food. But as one cookbook author I spoke with said, I don't go to her for Taiwanese food. I go to her for recipes on Chinese food. So you have to make that distinction because that's really important to people nowadays. And again, it just shows the complexity of this history, that it's not just a straightforward. And so, I even talked with my editors, like, should I put Taiwanese in the title or not? Should she be she in her time and day, she wouldn't have been considered a Taiwanese person because she didn't speak Taiwanese, just like my parents don't think of themselves as Taiwanese because they don't speak Taiwanese. But nowadays, everyone in Taiwan might claim the idea and identity of Taiwanese. So it's just a very different, a different moment of identities as they shift. So, Taiwanese food in the United States. So, very interesting. There's a wonderful cookbook called Made in Taiwan by Clarissa Wei. She's a Taiwanese American who's relocated to Taiwan and lives there now. And so she's very proud, fiercely proud of her Taiwanese identity. And so she said to me, "Oh, well, most of the Taiwanese restaurants in the United States, they're run by mainlanders or mainlander descendants, not by Taiwanese, like people who would be eating particular kinds of Taiwanese, dishes or foods, which again is like a different, different kind of thing from other kinds of regional Chinese cuisines. But I think there's a mix. But I think that, again, it can be kind of touchy for people, and they're very particular about what label and what language you use. But I think that with the awareness about Chinese food in general, there's just so much more awareness of like, oh, this is a Taiwanese restaurant. And so, we might get specific kinds of things here that we might not get at another kind of Chinese restaurant. Um, Taiwanese breakfast foods being among the more delicious things on this planet that I try to look for wherever I can. But if you live in a big city, and probably also in Hawaii as well, you get a lot of varieties of Chinese food and Taiwanese places, maybe that, is just a people's sophistication as that grows, then these regional identities become more and more important.
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if we had even more here in Hawaii, but but so this is we're kind of wrapping up our Q&A, Michelle, but there was one question about, what your plans are next. I think the audience would love to hear you continue to work on topics related to Chinese food and cuisine and all the other issues that you're touching on. Do you have plans for
Yeah.
more?
So
Yeah.
I'm right in the midst of writing a grant proposal for a new project on this will be an edited volume that I plan to do on global Chinese foodways because there's just a lot of fascinating recent work about Chinese foodways as they've been carried all around the world, not just Chinese American food, which American audiences will know well, but everywhere, like every place in Africa, all over Europe, all over different parts of Asia. People may have heard of Indo-Chinese food, which is like the Indian take on Chinese food, not to mention all the Chinese influences on Southeast Asian cuisines. So, and then on top of that, the influence that Chinese consumers, the growing middle class of Chinese consumers have on global foodways and production. All of those things are things that I'd like to explore with other scholars and other colleagues. So, I'm working on putting together another edited volume that will deal with global Chinese foodways because there's just so much to talk about and think about and explore. This idea of a diasporic Chinese identity and if there's something that brings people together in that or not. Um, so that's gonna be for now the next thing. And then I've got other stuff down the road, but that's the one that's mostly fleshed out now.
That sounds fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to that, and maybe you can come back to the China
Yeah,
seminar and speak about your future projects. So that would be really
happy to do
wonderful.
so.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we're back to Gerald. Thank you. Thank you so